Good evening, folks, and welcome to the 9th episode of The Wild World of Bees. I'm Lincoln Best, taxonomist for the Oregon Bee Atlas, and I'll be your host this evening. The Wild World of Bees is an online lecture series you can enjoy from the comfort of home. Through this series, we'll hear from great bee researchers and native bee advocates from around North America and the world. Often we'll have a focus closer to us here in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon. This month, they're calling in from the Star of the North, Minnesota. This series is brought to you by the Oregon Bee Atlas, a citizen science-based initiative to document the bee fauna and its floral relations in Oregon. The Oregon Bee Atlas is the biodiversity-focused arm of the Oregon Bee Project, a partnership between OSU Extension, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and the Oregon Department of Agriculture. The Oregon Bee Project is dedicated to pollinator health in the state. This series is sponsored by the Mount Pisgah Arboretum in Eugene, Oregon, the USDA NIFA Pollinator Health Grant, and the Native Bee Society of British Columbia. You can visit their website, bcnativebees.org, to learn more about their fauna, flora, and local initiatives. This month's talk is very timely because tomorrow is the Orchard Bee Association Conference. It's tomorrow. They're going to have lots of great talks about cavity nesting bees tomorrow. Visit their website at www.orchardbee.org and follow the links to register for tomorrow's conference. Do it now. The conference is tomorrow. In our last episode, I had the pleasure of hosting new to Oregon bee ecologist Lauren Panicio, who introduced us to the sunflower bees of the Central Valley in California. You can find her talk on our Oregon Bee Atlas YouTube channel. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Next month, we'll hopefully be hosting Professor John Asher of the National University of Singapore, who is the official bee taxonomist of Earth. He will discuss the global biodiversity of bees, which was the topic of a recent, very well-received paper. And if you have ever posted a bee on iNaturalist, join us next month. This evening, it's my pleasure to introduce Colleen Satyshur, a research scientist at University of Minnesota, working on 3 projects. The first is a native grassland plants used as nesting sites for wild bees. The second is the Minnesota Bee Atlas, a citizen science project, no small undertaking. And the third is the art and science of nesting bees, and I love art and science collaborations myself. Colleen has a broad background in ecology, having worked on endangered species and in entomology and ornithology before joining the Bee Lab. For those of you who want to hear more about the Oregon Bee Atlas, check out episode number 2 of the Pollination Podcast. And that features Elaine Evans, and it's hosted by Adoni Melathopoulos. You'll see that they have been a great inspiration for us here at the Oregon Bee Atlas. Now, if you have any questions for our guest, and I really hope you do, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll moderate them after the talk. Otherwise, please feel free to use the chat function, and I will see you in there. And Colleen, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Hello. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
My pleasure.
So I think I'm going to share screen. Is that how we get going here?
You got it.
Yeah.
Oh, Link, I think you need to stop sharing. Oh, yeah.
Oh, here we go. Is that working?
Yeah, looks great.
All right. So yeah, I'm here tonight to talk about the Minnesota Bee Atlas. And this is a citizen science or community science project where we were looking for bees all over the state of Minnesota. And that's kind of what we were doing for the last 5 years, with a big focus on finding out where in Minnesota these different bees are and what species we have. but also looking at the timing of when the bees were out and when they were nesting. And we found some new bees to the state. We found an old bee that we thought was lost, a species we hadn't seen for a while. And we also found endangered species. And we've got some information now on nesting dates and timing, as well as a nest that had never been seen by humans before. And so I'm going to tell you some details about all of that in 3 different parts of this talk tonight. And my own interests lie in the stem and wood nesting bees, and that's the part of the project that I was working on most. So I'm going to spend some extra time on that in the second part of the talk. Let's see if I can advance. There we go. So this project was funded by a grant from the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and that's a fund that was set up. It's paid for partly by the lottery money in Minnesota. And each year the legislature allocates funds to different natural resources grants, and they take input from citizens when they're making those decisions. And this is our team. So on the top there, you just saw that picture of Elaine Evans in the intro. And then next to her is Rob Blair. Those are the 2 PIs of the project. Elaine is an assistant extension professor and a bumblebee specialist. And Rob is a professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife and Conservation Biology, and he's an extension specialist. Over on the upper right, that's Britt Forsberg. She was our project coordinator and volunteer contact. She really did a lot of the groundwork on this project, connecting all the different parts, making sure things were working smoothly, getting supplies, and communicating with all of our volunteers. She works for the University of Minnesota Extension. Below here is Kevin Williams. He was a workshop facilitator, and he and Britt and Elaine did a lot of the educational workshops. I'm over there on the other side at the top, and below me is Thea Evans, who was our wild bee technician, and she worked with me a lot on the rearing and the stem and wood nesting bees. Our website for the Minnesota Bee Atlas was designed by Amy Whitty of Whitty Web Design, and she also did the database, which was an important part of the project. So we're looking at Minnesota. Minnesota's right kind of in the middle of the continent here. And I looked it up before we started. We are almost as big as Oregon. We're about 90,000 square miles, and Oregon's about 98,000. So similar range. And Minnesota is a point where 3 different large ecosystems meet in the continent. So the yellow on the map over there is the prairie, and the light green is deciduous forest kind of coming into the east, and then the coniferous forest is at the top there. So we got 3 broadly different areas in our state. And when we started this project, we really wanted to get a sense of what bees we had in the state. There wasn't a good sense of that yet. The DNR has now come out with a list of 470 bee species in Minnesota. But prior to that, the last published list was in 1919, so over 100 years ago, and they had less than 100 bees. So this is really an area I know a lot of states are working on. It's a really broad geographic range to try to survey all of your bees in a state. And we approached that challenge of trying to cover the whole area with by using participatory strategies, citizen science or volunteers. We had 3 different parts. So one was all bees, and this was kind of open to anyone who wanted to participate. And when I go through those slides, they'll be indicated with the camera icon. Our second part was structured bumblebee surveys, and those will be indicated with the little bee icon. And then the third part was these tunnel nesting bee nest blocks, and that's indicated with the little apartment complex icon. We did a lot of outreach during this project. It was an important part. So we did 39 different workshops with over 1,000 participants and a number of different public events, a lot of participants, over 6,000 of those. These workshops, some were specific to bumblebee identification and some were broad bee identification workshops to pull in volunteers for all different parts of our project, as well as just display some of the information. And let's see, so our volunteers, we had about 150 volunteers per year across all the 3 different parts of the project. Our volunteers for the bumblebees had a couple of specific training options, one in-person workshop or one online. And our block volunteers had a couple of videos on how to hang their blocks and to monitor them. And our volunteers came from all over the state of Minnesota. Let's see, we had master naturalists, we had SNA stewards, we have families, we had nature centers, and county natural resource departments. All of these people participated in different parts of this project, and we really couldn't have done it without our wonderful volunteers. The first strategy was the survey of all bees, and we really wanted this to be open to anyone who wanted to participate. And we used the program iNaturalist, which it sounds like a lot of people are probably familiar with. If you haven't used it, it's a program where you can upload a picture of a bee or another organism and receive help in identifying it. So this means you don't have to know a lot about bees in order to participate. And look at these wonderful pictures that people were able to get of bees. These are really small animals, and they've got these really clear photos that were submitted. Our iNaturalist project has over 12,000 observations and counting. So this project is still active. You can go on when you start seeing bees again this coming summer and submit more observations if you're in Minnesota. The map there shows where all the different points are where we've already received an observation. And we've got 144 species through iNaturalist. A couple of important finds from the iNaturalist part. We've got a picture of Megachile sculpturalis, and this is the bee. It's over on the left here. It's one of the largest leafcutter bees in the United States, and it's also an exotic species or an introduced species that's been expanding its range. So good to know where that was. We got that photo from Heather Holm. And then we found this bumblebee species, or we have a photo submitted of Bombus frigidus. And this bee hasn't been recorded in Minnesota for over 80 years. And it was not recorded during our bumblebee surveys. We only got this record through iNaturalist from G.W. McCormick. So really glad to see that bee back in the state, or that it's still here. These two species sort of indicate the benefits of using a program like this or an approach like this, so we can really get a lot of records from all over the place and get these sort of rarer finds. Some of the limitations we found with using iNaturalist are that we tend to get larger bees and more common bees, as you might expect, and also bees that can be identified from photographs. Some bees, especially the little ones, you really have to get them under a microscope in order to tell what species they are. The second strategy that we used were these structured bumblebee surveys. So we had 98 volunteers across 5 years, and they found 17 of Minnesota's 23 bumblebee species. Our bumblebee volunteers used routes that were established for the breeding bird atlas. They're spread throughout Minnesota. On the map there, if the route is in blue, it was not chosen for a bee atlas, and if it was in red, then it was chosen all 5 years of the bee atlas project. So you can see we have a bit more route adoption where we have more people. Right around here is the Twin Cities. Each route was 25 miles long, and volunteers chose 5 stops along that route that had flowers. Not everywhere is going to have a flower. And at each stop, they would capture bumblebees from flowers for 10 minutes. And this was a catch and release approach. So trying to do visual observations, and where the volunteer maybe wasn't sure or a more difficult bee, they would take a photograph. And they would record the flower and the photograph online, enter those onto our website. And these routes were run 3 times each summer. Just wanted to put here, this is the photo tube that our volunteers used to take pictures of the bumblebees. Some of the characters are like underneath the bee, and it's not necessarily easy to get a good picture of what you would need for a diagnostic character. So this is a tool that we adapted from Thompson and Zung 2017. It's basically a clear plastic tube inside a clear plastic tube with this little cushion at the bottom here, and it's got a divot cut out so that when you slide the tubes into each other, you don't squish the bee into the bottom while you're trying to hold it still. While we were doing the project, so we started 2015, in 2017, Bombus affinis was listed as a federally endangered species. And its potential areas in Minnesota were mapped, places where it was potentially living. And those are indicated on the map with the red for high potential and the yellow for low potential. And once it was listed, only volunteers with a permit from the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service could survey within those potential areas. But despite that, our volunteers found 3 new areas where affinis was present. And those are indicated with the pink arrows there. There's 2 kind of down in the southeast, and then 1 up north kind of by Duluth. Having these additional locations from the Bee Atlas is important because the recovery plan for Bombus affinis it focuses on the remaining known populations. And we just added 3 more known populations. Our volunteers also observed other declining bumblebees. So let's see, we've got Bombus terricola is in blue, and we had 50 individuals of those, and 106 frigidus, and they're in yellow. And frigidus was found throughout the state, and terricola was primarily observed up north. And then they also saw 19 Pennsylvanicus, and those are shown in pink, and it's primarily down south. This is an example of some of the floral use data that came out of it, and this is for Bombus affinis. So, and again, this is use and not preference. This is just where the bees were found. So affinis was found on bee balm and goldenrod and culver's root, as well as spotted knapweed and red clover. Our third strategy, and this was my favorite part, is the bee nesting blocks. We had 419 blocks out throughout the project and 22 stem bundles. We got over 7,000 bee specimens from 33 different species. Before I get into the specifics of what we did on our project, I just want to get everybody on the same page about bee nesting. So when we talk about wild bee habitat, wild bees need a couple things, right? They need food, which for bees is flowers, for pollen and nectar, and they also need shelter. For bees, shelter usually means a place to nest. And a lot of bee nests look something like this. The arrow there is pointing to a young bee. It's that sort of grayish, smooth lump on the orangey yellow ball of pollen and nectar that the mother bee has stored for it. And there are actually 2 baby bees in this nest, and they each have their own pollen ball and they each have their own room. These bees are separated by these walls here of greenish vegetation that the mother bee has put in there. And this large bit over here is a plug at the end of the nest to try to protect it. This sort of strategy is fairly common within bees. Most of our bees are solitary nesting, and that means that each female builds her own nest by herself. She doesn't have any workers or help with it. There's no colony like in honeybees. And then when she's done building this nest, then she flies off and the young develop on their own. About a third of the bees worldwide nest in stems or wood, and most of the rest of them nest in the ground, but I'm going to focus on the stem and wood nesting bees here. So this nest is illustrating very well that one of the first purposes of a nest, which is a safe place for those young bees to eat and grow, and also protects their food store. That pollen and nectar is a really rich food source that a lot of other things would also like to eat. The second purpose that a nest serves is a place for bees to overwinter. Bees are still out there right now, even though it's winter, and they'll be out there during the snow and when it's below 0. They pass the winter. Most bees survive the winter inside their nest as immatures. So in the picture of the nest here, these are larvae that they were laid as eggs earlier in the summer, and they've now eaten all their pollen stores, and they're at the stage right ready to pupate. But they're going to pause, and they're diapausing here throughout the winter. They're stuck in that stem in their little rooms until the next spring when it warms up, and then they can complete their development and come out. So just because we're not seeing flowers doesn't mean the bees have sort of magically disappeared. They're just staying at home like the rest of us. And this is just pulling it all together. This is the sort of nesting cycle of bees. So in the winter of the first year, maybe you've got an empty nesting substrate here. In the spring and summer when it warms up, a mother bee will come and build her nest and lay eggs, and the larvae will eat and they'll grow. And by fall, they're going to be mature larvae. They'll have finished all their food, but they're still going to stay in that nest. And then in the winter, they're still going to stay in that nest. And then it's not until the following spring and summer that those young bees will finish their life cycle and emerge as adults to start their own nest. So it really takes a little over a year for bees to finish their life cycle, and a lot of that time is spent inside the nest. They're spending more time inside the nest than they are out flying around. And that means that understanding and conserving nesting sites is really important if we're interested in understanding and conserving bees. Oh, I hope this video works. So this is a video I took, it's actually prior to the Bee Atlas. This is in a stem, it's a Ceratina, and it's a neat look at inside a nest, a place that, you know, you're probably not gonna see in a lot of other places. It's through a microscope, so it looks a little weird, but that is a pollen ball, and there's the bee, it's whitish there, that's the head of it. And it's eating. It's just moving around, taking bites of that food, and it's just keeps going. Doesn't seem to mind me looking at it. And while you're watching this, I want to mention that as awesome it is to see something like this, once you, like me, open up this nest, you now are responsible for that baby bee and taking care of it and rearing it to adulthood. And remember, that takes over a year. So this is something that isn't to be done lightly, as neat as it is to see in there. You can't just put that bee back out there. You have to kind of finish the job and rear it out. Oh, and let's get past that. So we're going to come back now to the Bee Atlas itself and what we did with our bee nesting blocks. Our volunteers came from around the state of Minnesota. We mailed them out a nesting block that looked like this one here, and it has 30 different tunnels of different diameters that are drilled in there. Each one of those is a potential nesting site for a bee. Our volunteers hung them in semi-natural habitats and then went out and checked them every 3 or 4 weeks during the summer. So this is Sue Wilms here, and she's using an otoscope to look into a hole and see if she can see something like this, so a plug that shows that the nest has been completed. That information our volunteers then entered online. And in the fall, the blocks were brought back to the University of Minnesota, where we reared them through the winter in a growth chamber where we could keep them cold at winter temperatures and then warm them up and get the bees to come out. We had plastic tubes over the tunnels, so when the bees came out, we could take the tube off and put a new one on. We got a lot of bees this way very quickly. These bees are the kind that, generally speaking, you need to put on a pin to figure out what kind they are. So they were pinned for identification. At this point, too, I want to tell a little story about those otoscopes and why we're using them to look for bees. When I started my stem nesting bee research, it was about the same time I had my first daughter, and she was getting a lot of ear infections. And a fellow mom gave me her old otoscope. So that's a That's a $22 otoscope you can buy on Amazon. It's Dr. Mom brand. It has a like 3x magnification and a little light in there. The idea was I was going to use this to check my daughter's ears and avoid going into the doctor quite as often. And that didn't work out. Turns out a squirming toddler doesn't like to have their ears poked at. But while I was sitting there, I was realizing I had other small dark tunnels that I wanted to see inside. And I took it out in the field with me, and it turns out to be a really good field tool to get an idea of what's in your bees' nests. So our volunteers would give us reports of when they saw the plugs in the nests. And I want to mention here too that our nest blocks are closely modeled on ones by the Bees Needs, which was a Colorado citizen science project. And they have letters that indicate the rows and numbers that indicate the columns. Here's a real life example from Roseau County, Minnesota on July 5th. There were 2 plugs. There's a cellophane plug up here in A2 and a mud plug in B3. And 3 weeks later, approximately July 22nd, you see the whole second column's got something going on in it. And the third column, there's also a bunch of plugs here. Looking at this, I know that between July 5th and July 22nd, these nests were completed. And that tells me about the timing. And when those bees come out, I can attach the time range for their nesting to the species. And I got something like this. So it's over a period of weeks, right, that we were looking for nest completion, a tunnel that was empty one time and then plugged the next time. But if I take all of those that were collected across the whole project, I can get a graph that looks something like this. On the bottom are dates from April to September. And the higher the line goes, the more times that date fell into a plug range. So the blue line is for Osmia lignaria, and that turned out to be our first bee that came out in the spring, the first one that was making its nests. After that came Osmia pumila in orange, and Osmia tersula in gray. Seems to start about the same time, but then continue a bit longer. And again, these bees are spending most of their life inside their nest. So this information about nesting is really lays the groundwork for a lot of other research. Let's see. The other main type of information we got from the project was distribution data. On the graph, or the map, sorry, on the right-hand side, all the open gray circles are where we had bee atlas blocks throughout the project. And the black circles that are filled in are where we reared out Osmia pumila. And you can see they're really concentrated in the southeastern part of the state, despite us looking everywhere else. And just as a review, over here are the different ecoregions that we've got. We've got coniferous forest up in the north. We got that diagonal of deciduous forest, and then the prairie grassland over in the southwest corner and running along the western side. This is a little tall grass aspen parkland up in the north there. And here to offer a contrast is another small Osmia species, which is Osmia tersula. So here's pumila here on the top, and it's looking over here at its map, really in the southeast, and tersula is over the whole sort of northern part of the state. It's neat to see these patterns of distribution start coming out of the project. At this point, I would want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of bees that we found. And, you know, we had 33 different species. There's a lot of different species of wild bees. It's not really a one size fits all when it comes to bees and bee habitat and bee nesting. You can't just say, this is what you need for wood nesting bees. And it's, you know, have one thing. They have different materials that they use, different seasons that they're out. So this is just, I'm going to show you a little bit about a few different kinds here. This is a quick shot of different materials. There's a leaf material here that a Megachile is using. Below that is resin used by Heriades, so that it smells like pine. You think pine sap when you see that. Below the Heriades is a Hylaeus, And Hylaeus is a completely different group of bees. They don't collect the material, they secrete it from glands around their throat, and they sort of paint it on their nest. And on the other side at the top, we've got that Osmia with a chewed vegetation plug. Below that, an Anthidium. And Anthidium scrape hairs off of the plants, and it looks for all the world like a little dirty cotton ball that they shove in there. And that's what they use to divide up their nests. And at the bottom is Ceratina. Ceratina we didn't get in the bee atlas. They're an obligate excavator. They will not reuse an old tunnel. They want to dig out a fresh one themselves each year. And the female, the mother, provides some maternal care for her young. So she'll actually stay there and protect the nest. She doesn't build a plug. She just uses her own body to protect it and to care for her young. Here's a quick look at Osmia, and I've already shown you a few of them with the distribution graph, so I'm just going to do the whole genus. This is a genus of bees. These guys are different than a lot of other bees because they overwinter as adults. So they go through that, egg to larvae, they finish their food and they don't stop. They keep going and they turn right into adults and then they stop. Before they would even start to move as adults, they just come out of finish their pupation, and they stay in their cocoons, in their nests, in their cells throughout the winter like that. But they are ready to go. Like, you barely have to turn up the temperature and these guys start crawling right out. They're ready to come out first thing in the spring, and they're after those early season flowers like dandelions and fruit crops, that sort of thing. The really common one, blue orchard mason bee, does these mud plugs, Osmia lignaria. A lot of our other Osmia use chewed vegetation. Here's an example of a Megachile. It's a genus in Megachilidae. Leafcutter bees, one of the more common stem and wood nesting bees. This is a really classic leafcutter bee. It's very charismatic. It's very golden. The hairs underneath the abdomen are just this golden color, and on top as well. It's a beautiful bee, and it was fairly common in our project. And makes a very typical leafcutter nest. This is the nest down here at the bottom. It wraps its cells in cut pieces of leaf. So there are walls in there, it's just that the outside is also wrapped. For plugs, now I guess it's a bit tricky because I see about 50-50 between chewed vegetation plugs and whole leaf piece plugs. And just as a side, this is how we got those nest pictures. So these are solid blocks of wood. We wanted it to be as natural as possible. We didn't want to have a lot of man-made factors confounding and what bees we could get. We're trying to get as many bees as we could. And so to get into them, we had to use a chop saw and then a hammer and a chisel to get those nests open. It's an art. Here's another Megachile, just for a little contrast, another leafcutter bee. And again, leafcutter bees, they've got that scopa under the bottom, that's their pollen-carrying hairs. And this one is a pretty large one for a Megachile. They are actually recognizable by sight when they're alive. If you can get a good look at a female, they've got these like teeth coming down from the back of their chins. They're like little tusks sticking out, and these really big jaws on the front. Pretty common bee in the Minnesota Bee Atlas, and this one extends down into that prairie region, that corner, southwest corner there. Megachile pugnata, in contrast with relativa and a lot of other Megachile, does not line its nest cells with leaves. It's still a leafcutter bee, it just doesn't do that kind of leaf cutting. They will use circles of leaves in the partitions, and they also mix it with mud and also chewed pieces of leaves. And their plugs look a lot like mud. It's mud and chewed vegetation mixed together. All right, have a look at this bee and see if you can spot what's wrong with it. This is a pugnata, right? You can see that tusk sticking out of the back of the cheek there. And over here, we've got, face on, look on the bee, and you've got one foreleg here, and then you've got the other foreleg over here, and there's the jaws, different antenna. This is a gynandromorph specimen. This bee is literally physically half male and half female, split right down the middle from head to the tip of the abdomen. One half is female. Here's a female foreleg, here's a female jaw, here's a female antenna, and the other half is male. Males have bigger eyes and smaller jaws and these elaborate forelegs and longer antenna. If you were to look back at the scopa, the pollen carrying hairs, only the females have those. Only the female side of the abdomen had that. So that was a weird one when we saw that come out. That's really neat and striking example. Gynandromorphy happens in bees occasionally and in other animals too. Sometimes it's considered mostly a mistake. And move on to another genus here. Check my time. This is Heriades. Heriades carinata was super common in our blocks. It's a small bee, it's black. It has this highly sculptured, rough textured exoskeleton. And this one, by the way, almost never shows up on iNaturalist. So this is one that is not well surveyed with the photograph technique, but very common. Heriades carinata and other Heriades use resin to build the walls inside their nests and also their plugs. This little picture up here, you can count the little bee butts, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would get a lot of Heriades when we get Heriades. Different genus again, Hylaeus, not in the family Megachilidae. They're Coletidae. Nearly hairless, very small. A lot of people mistake them for ants the first couple times they see them. And Hylaeus verticalis, we got 3 nests of them kind of up in the northern part. Their common name is the yellow-faced bee, and you can kind of see why. This is the female over here with 2 little stripes, and the male's face is pretty much covered in yellow. These are the guys that secrete their nest building material from glands around their back of their head, and they paint it on with this sort of broad tongue that they've got. They line the walls, they make the partitions out of this, and then they plug the nest with the same material. And when it dries, it's this thin, papery film. It's really easy to puncture, but it's also waterproof. There are accounts of Hylaeus nests that are submerged in spring floods, and then the flood recedes and the bees emerge just fine. So I really like these guys. They're really neat. And they also don't carry their pollen outside their body like most bees do. They don't have very many hairs. They carry the pollen and nectar in their crop and then regurgitate it when they get back to the nest. Okay, so we got a lot of cool bees. We got at least as many cool wasps. Wasps have a bad rap, but they're actually really neat. And the ones we get are gentle. They have the same life cycle as our bees. They're solitary. These are not the ones that are stinging you. So some of our common wasps are a grass wasp. This is really big. This is bigger than most of our bees. A long, stringy black wasp that uses grass. It looks for all the world like grass clippings from your lawn, just kind of shoved into the hole or maybe in a little spiral. They stock their nest with tree crickets. We get a lot of eumenids. This is a group of bees or wasps. They look like yellow jackets. They are not yellow jackets. Yellow jackets are social and live in the ground. These guys make, each mom makes their own nest. They stock them with caterpillars and plug the nest with mud, usually smooth mud. Another big group of wasps that we get are specids. These guys tend to be small and dark and not have a lot of markings, and they have this blockhead look to them. And they use resin, at least the ones that we got in the project, primarily used resin to build their nests. And they stock with aphids. A couple wasp nests. So they're kind of like carnivorous bees, right? And they're stocking their nests with these animals that are pests of a lot of human crops. So they're pretty good to have around. The top nest up there, there's 2 partitions of pith, and that inside bit would have 1 egg in it, and it's just chock full of aphids. The bottom nest is a caterpillar. It's been stunned and dragged into the stem, and there's little white eggs, wasp eggs, laid all over it. Last bit are some unusual discoveries, neat things that we found. Here's Megachile relativa again. Turns out these guys have 2 generations in a summer, sometimes, but not always, in Minnesota. First fall, I started getting plugs that look like this with a hole in it. Tells me that something has already come out. And since it's a vegetation plug, I know it's a bee. So we went back in the following years and tried to pull in strategically a few blocks and reared them during the summer and got out relativa. So good to know that happens. What it tells us is if we're going to use nest blocks to survey bees, we can't count on getting them all if we leave them out all summer and then just collect them in the fall. We got a nest of Anthophora terminalis. So this is an apidae. It normally is recorded from rotting or softer wood material, so unusual to find it in a wood block. So we wrote up a description of it and we compared it with all the other records we could find, and that's just been published in the Journal of Melitology. It's a neat little note. And then here are our new state records. I really kind of like this. We got 3 species that had never been recorded in Minnesota before. Osmia georgica is yellow, 1 nest in the southeast. Megachile inimica in blue. It had showed up in 2 different locations in the south, and then Megachile frugidalis is in that red color, also in the south. These points in Minnesota expand our understanding for all 3 species ranges northward, but we can't say for sure if they have recently come to Minnesota or if they were there all the time and nobody was looking yet. One other awesome thing about this is nobody had ever seen the nest of Megachile frugidalis before this. So we were able to open it up with the chop saw and the chisels, and we took pictures. And these new finds and the nest descriptions are written up and accepted to the Great Lakes entomologist. I think I've got time for this. Inimica, frugidalis, and pugnata are all part of the same group of bees. They're related to each other. They don't line their nest with pieces of leaves. And there's a few more closely related in that subgenus Steapis. We don't know the nest structure for 2 of them. So in preparation for my talk, I watched the Oregon Bee Atlas's talk on their webinar and noticed as the species were scrolling through that you guys have Fidelis and Melitarsis, or at least you found them. And when I was looking up information, their Fidelis is caught in traps, but there wasn't a description of the nest. And Melitarsis, people don't even know if it nests in the ground or if it would nest in stems or woods. So we don't have either of those in Minnesota, but if you guys come across them, you might see if you can follow them to their nest or something. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up. All of our information on the different species are on species pages on the website. We have z.umn.edu/stembees. And then over on the side, there'll be a link for species pages. Our data, our specimen data is into the the Biodiversity Atlas, which is hosted by the Bell Museum. We are hoping for Minnesota Bee Atlas 2.0. That funding is currently, we're recommended for it, but the funding is still pending. And we would use that to build off what we've already got, what we've already learned, to try to find out what plants those bees are bringing into the nest. It's kind of hard to tell from just the squished up material. We'd try some DNA analysis on that. There are some volunteer opportunities that will be coming up probably this year. The Bee Atlas, iNaturalist, as well as this Megachile leaf cut iNaturalist project are open. In the leaf cuts, I'm looking for pictures of plants that have these characteristic holes cut in them by leaf cutter bees. And there will be some sort of bumblebee survey this summer. We don't know what it's going to look like, but you can check in with Elaine on that. And then finish up with stuff you can do in your yard. So I've done a bunch of work on stems as well as wood nesting bees, and you can leave out cut dead stems in your yard. Anything greater than 1/8 of an inch in diameter, 8 inches to 24 tall. And remember, if you're going to do this, that the bees will nest in the summer, but they're not going to leave that stem until the following summer. So you got to leave that stem also until the following year if you're going to do this. We recommend not clumping stems and providing some diverse plants and other mud and water nearby to help support the bees. This is from a pamphlet that's been published on the Bee Lab website. So you can go back and look up this information. I know it's a lot to have right here. And that's it, the end. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Colleen. I can't believe that you caught those Megachile species flying by, scrolling by in that animation. That's awesome.
I had to pause and go back, actually.
Yeah. That's cool. So we have quite a few questions already lined up here. So I'll do my best to moderate them for you. So starting with our own, Mary Jo Mosby from the coast. Where can one procure a photography tube like the one that you had in your earlier slide there?
Yeah, for the bumblebee surveys.
Mm-hmm.
Those we handmade for the project. There is a description in that article there. I don't know if I can get you guys a link or something to that to send out to people, but that's, they explain how they did it there, and then we kind of modeled it after that. You could probably contact Elaine for some more details on that. I know the materials came out to about $8 per tube, but it's not something that you can buy yet.
Okay. Approximately what were the dimensions
of those tubes?
Yeah, because part of the challenge is getting the bumblebee into the tube. And so a tube that's too narrow is too dangerous.
Yep. So the other part of that trick is you stick the bumblebee in the cooler with the ice pack for a little bit until it stops moving, but isn't dead yet. And then sort of tumble it into the tube and adjust it a little bit before it starts to warm up and move again. I think those, just based on it, I would say they're 3 or 4 inches in diameter, probably.
Okay, great, thank you. From Tony over in Redmond, Oregon, do you reuse these blocks over and over? How do you clean them in between seasons?
Yeah, that's a good question. And bee blocks are thought to harbor and transmit parasites if they're reused too often, or fungus and other types of things. So it is important to make sure that you're offering bees a clean, safe place to nest. In the Bee Atlas, we did not reuse the blocks. We disposed of them and actually sent them to an incinerator at the end so that we wouldn't move pests around the country, or around the state rather. The general recommendation is about 3 years. I have tried to clean out blocks myself. Solid blocks like this that don't come apart are harder to clean. You can make a pipe cleaner or a bristle brush and try to get into those holes with some bleach to try to kill what's in there, and then obviously let it dry out really good. But that's kind of the best that we have right now. And then, don't throw it out with the nest in it. Try to let them emerge first.
Do you have experience with other kinds of blocks? So for our atlas, we use blocks that are essentially like cartridges that are stacked on top of one another. What do you think of that design?
I like those with the plexiglass on it, or is it?
Sure, yeah.
Open? Yeah, you can make some that open more easily. They are more labor intensive to make. They cost a bit more, and they also have the potential, those cracks where you can get parasites crawling.
Oh, fair. That's a really good point. So if a block has any gaps in the tube, then little critters and things can move around, whereas if it's solid, then they can't.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And listed
no, it's okay.
Holes far enough in from the side so that the ovipositors can't reach into the larvae.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, get some Megarrhiza or something trying to bore their way into the nest. Let's see, from Mark Chow, any notable findings on Coelioxys or other kleptoparasitic bees? I was wondering the same thing.
Cool. Yeah, we did get Coelioxys. We got 3 main kinds parasitizing our most common Megachile, and I'm not sure if I can name them off the top of my head. right now. They weren't particularly unusual. Celiaxis, it was neat to get them. They were, let's see, relativa, pugnata, and campanulae. They're corresponding Celiaxis species. Modestus, molestus, and alternata, I want to say.
Oh, cool. Alternata goes after campanulae,
Is that the
I
pair?
think.
Okay. I've got it all.
It's a super skinny one. That's cool.
Yep.
Let's see, from Camille, are the plugs in the cavity nests similar to honeybee propolis?
They may function with a similar purpose. It's not, so the resin plugs would be most similar in material to propolis. Propolis is also a resin, generally from cottonwood or poplar trees for honeybees, and then they mix it with wax. We don't know that our native bees are using wax mixed with the resin. I do suspect them of mixing plant material in with some of the resin, especially campanulae. The propolis for honeybees is supposed to form, or thought to perform a protective like casing around the nest, and in that way our plugs and the walls by the bees are similar and may also provide some antimicrobial protection for the larvae that are in there. That's an area that, you know, kind of wide open right now.
Great. Let's see, from Amy. Do you have any comments on Heather Holmes' findings that stem nesting bees are using second year stems preferentially?
Second year as in?
I'm thinking like dead for 1 year.
And then not until the, so
you know,
the summer.
Yeah, it'd be like previous year's raspberry canes, or what's another good example?
So when you, they won't nest in a live stem, stem nesting bees. So they're not going to nest in anything that's green or recently dead. And so usually it has to grow. The plant grows 1 year. So actually, if you think about it, it's a 3-year cycle. Plant grows 1 year, dies, stem is dead, then the bee can nest the next year, and then after that they can come out. I guess I'm not familiar with Heather's thoughts on if they're using that stem that first year after it dies or the second year after it dies. And it may just have to do with the stem being dead enough and dry enough.
Right. Great. Let's see, from Ron. For Osmia lignaria, how many days elapse between the egg laid date and the egg hatch date?
It's just a few. Lignaria has been studied pretty well, and that number is out there. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's just a few days usually between when the egg's laid and when they get going.
Great answer.
I think what's motivating, Ron does very careful, and he's got plexi, he's done a lot of observation. I guess Ron's probably wondering if it's different in Minnesota, regional differences.
Oh, but instead of out where you guys are. I guess I don't know. And I'm trying to think if I know anybody locally that would be studying Osmia to that degree.
Maybe producers.
Yeah.
Beats me, I don't know. Depends on the temperature, right? This is a temperature dependent process. Yeah.
It has to be above a certain temperature for them to start moving and developing. And then they kind of, all insects are temperature dependent to a certain degree. I would think that there's some correlation there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, from Tony again. What environment did you find Lignaria in? Prairie, forest, or other?
Lignaria is pretty broadly distributed across Minnesota. Not in the really far north, and then not quite down in the prairie, edge of the prairie region. So in that deciduous forest, coniferous forest edge throughout Minnesota, but they're kind of all over the place. They didn't show a definite trend in Minnesota.
Another one from Ron here. Ron's a heavy hitter. What species of Isodontia are you finding?
Isodontia mexicana. We did not get the other one.
Okay.
So just the black ones. Yep.
Cool. From Amy, if stem nesters are primarily in the stem for their life cycle, can you talk about some human habits that might help protect these bees?
Yeah, so these guys are in our yards, in our landscaping plants and that sort of stuff, as well as in natural areas. If you want to promote them in your yard, so they need a cut end they can't bore through the side of the stem, at least none of the ones in North America that I've heard of so far. So they want to get in through that cut end to enter the softer or hollow center of the stem. So cutting down your stems at the end of the year and leaving a stubble up will make available nesting sites the following year. And then not taking down that stubble, letting the plants grow up and around it for that year and then the next year. They'll kind of naturally decompose on their own, the stems, or if in the second summer you can kind of place them in a place, maybe a more out of the way place to let the bees come out that would be safe for them to emerge, but maybe not attractive for re-nesting. So those are some stem specific things that people can do. And again, we kind of recommend against bundling or grouping them too much to prevent the parasites from just hopping from one nest to the other.
Perfect.
Does that answer your question there?
Oh yeah, that's great. So we do have lots of really awesome questions. So we're probably going to do another 10 or 15 minutes of questions,
okay,
just to give people in the audience an idea of the time. So let's see, from Bonnie on Vancouver Island, did you rear all the bees in the nest blocks, or did you split them and remove the larvae cocoons? And how did you manage so many species in your blocks? Just from the gallery diameter variation, or?
How did we manage to get so many different species?
Yeah.
Yeah, so offering the different diameters allowed different bees of different sizes to nest and to get a broad range of bees. And we tried to hit from the smallest possible bee we could get to the largest possible bee so that we could get whatever was out there looking for a place to nest, and then spreading them across the whole state too in different types of environments. And yeah, we did rear them all out. So again, they're solid blocks, with the advantages and disadvantages that come with that. The best way to rear them out is to leave them alone in there and not open it up. Every time you open a bee nest, you run the risk of either physically injuring the bee as you open it, or just ruining that little chamber that the mother has built. They built it to help keep the right humidity and temperature and oxygen level in there as the bee's developing. And they can develop outside of that, but I've also had a lot of mortality, especially with younger bees in younger nests that I've opened. So I tend to, if I really want to know what the bee is, I tend to err on the side of caution and let it develop undisturbed in the nest.
Awesome. Let's see, from our hibiscus bee specialist in Ontario, what do you think accounts for the distinct distributions of the 3 bumblebee species that you showed?
Let's see. For the Osmia there?
3 bumblebee species.
Oh, the 3 bumblebee species. Got it. I think you're going to have to ask Elaine that question.
Yeah.
I think we can get her email there. I know she's got some thoughts on bumblebee distribution north to south. She's seen other species that also show like a north to south gradient in Minnesota. But
do you have any suspicions?
I would say it would be like a temperature preference or a
temperature,
like
habitat,
a host plant preference, but that's just a guess off the top of my head. Elaine should really be the one doing that one. So
my wild guess would be nesting preference, or plants, something to do with the flora. That's great. It's so crazy sometimes when you see these things, they have such a distinct range, and it's like you go like 1 mile and then they're just not there anymore.
Yeah.
From Sandy, what experience do you bee hoteliers have in using natural hollow stems such as lovage stems for hotels?
Natural stems work great when you bundle them. Just make small bundles. One of the other projects I've worked on, I looked at native stems, native plant species in Minnesota to see if they were being used by bees And we found that a number of them are. And I think my sense is that it has more to do with the physical characteristic of a stem, something that's strong enough to last that whole nesting cycle, the whole year and through the winter. And then some bees seem to have a preference for hollow versus pithy. But I'd say try whatever you've got around for stems and just see, especially if it's a pithy stem and then you go back later and there's a hole in it, you know somebody's in there, somebody's living in there.
So from the Hammer in Vancouver, if you're not bundling the stems, how do you present them?
We have done them individually on stakes, or we just like leave them where they're growing and cut them off right there. And you don't have to leave all of them where they grow. You know, you can strategically cut them so that it still looks pretty, or how you'd like it to look too.
It can become an element of design.
Yeah, you can make pattern.
Yeah. From Bill, what diameter holes get the most bees?
Oh gosh, in the Bee Atlas blocks, that middle column is really popular, the lower first column, and you're going to ask me what those diameters are. 3/16 I think was the lower third column, and then 1/2 inch was our largest size. So where are we? 1/4 inch holes, 3/16 to 5/8. If I've got that right.
Mm-hmm.
The diameters are up on our website in our manual there for what size the holes are. We wanted to have instructions up there if other people wanted to build their own blocks to put up that weren't necessarily part of the official atlas.
Okay. Let's see, from Mark, this is a tough one. Mark says, you must have gotten lucky with that gynandromorph specimen. Or is it more common in bees or hymenopterans? Does it have anything to do with haplodiploidy? Gone wrong. Or is this known?
Oh, so I was looking at this before the talk. Somebody's going to ask. And I didn't get too far into it, but what I was looking at was that it seems to be, there was looking at a honeybee colony that was producing some in Australia, and their thought was that it was 2 sperm trying to join with 1 egg, and when you get sperm and an egg, you get what do you get? You get a female, and if you get just a sperm, you get a male. And so they were sort of growing side by side in the same group there, but not quite working together. That was their thought. The other thought was it's poor cell division, and so that some of the chromosomes don't make it into one cell early in development, and that one ends up as haploid, whereas the other cells are diploid.
Yeah, that makes sense. At the first division,
Yeah.
if the one cell has the second set of chromosomes and the other doesn't, then you have half and half.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. So
Good question, Mark.
Not a consensus yet on that.
No. So from Ellen, in my simple way of thinking, an egg would be more likely to survive cold weather than an egg or an adult. So what are your thoughts on the biological advantage of the larval overwintering strategy?
Oh, and just one correction there, Link. It was larva or adult, not egg or adult.
Oh, egg or adult. Okay.
One more time.
In Ellen's opinion, an egg would seem more likely to survive cold weather.
Oh.
So what are your thoughts on the advantage of an egg versus an adult overwintering?
Sometimes eggs of animals are very well protected, and that is the stage in which they overwinter. Bee eggs, I don't think have some of the same protection as other kinds of insects. And also they're sitting there on that pollen ball,
Mm-hmm.
you know, rich ball of pollen and sugar. And if you've ever left like sugar and sweet things out on your counter, you know, they go moldy after a while. Ants come in and try to eat them, at least sometimes in my house. So I think it's to the advantage of the bee to eat that up as fast as possible and turn it into bee body and then pause.
Perfect. So let's see, a couple notes from Lisa Robinson in Wenatchee. She notes that there are now recyclable straw cleaning brushes that would work great for cleaning blocks as well. And she asks, what would happen? Would you happen to know if the sticky substance on sunflowers, if that's used by bees? And she doesn't know if that's a sap or a resin or what it is that comes from sunflowers. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I know, I can imagine what you're talking about because I know I've touched the flowers and gotten that sticky stuff on there. I have not come across any mention of sunflower juices or resins being used by bees, but again, people don't really know what some of these materials that bees are using for their nests are. Once it gets into the nest, it's a little hard to tell, where it came from. So maybe I wouldn't rule it out, but I haven't heard of any evidence either for that yet.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
From Lori in Eugene, will one tube in your block get just one bee species?
A good question. And the answer is no. You can get stacked nests. You can get a nest that starts and then stops for some reason if the female dies and doesn't finish it, or it's just really short. And then you get another species that comes and builds on top of it. So you can get like a little sandwich effect going there. And sometimes they both survive and they both come out of the same tunnel, and other times the one of them like chews through the other one and on the way out, and you just get one of the nests. But yeah.
Let's see. Lisa Robinson has another note here that she has found petal cutting Megachile nesting in live curly dock stem.
Ooh, good. That's a neat one.
Yeah.
Petal. I know one petal cutting Megachile, and I'm sure there's more out there. But Megachile brevis is one that I've seen with petals in the nest. So I'm not sure if that's what you've got. But I've got them out of stems also. So curly dock, huh? I'm gonna write that down.
We got a question here from Judy down in Grants Pass. When I cut back my hollow-stemmed plants, the stems remain upright, while in bundles and blocks, the holes are horizontal. Do bees have a preference, and does orientation affect fecundity?
Those are really good questions, and those are ones we don't know yet. That's a great one. It's something I've wondered too. They will use both. I know they'll use both different kinds of stems, and I've gotten the same species from vertical stems and horizontal stems. On the other hand, I do think there is some preference among some bees for one orientation or the other. Interesting, I've also gotten bees nesting in the bottom side of our stem. So when we put them on our stakes, we forgot to cover the bottom, and we had Hylaeus going up in there, nesting upside down with the pollen at the top of the cell and then the egg and then the next cell below it. So I think bees are a little more adaptable and flexible than we give them credit for. They're really going to take advantage of what they can find out there.
Well, we still have a lot of questions piling in here, so we'll do a few more. Okay. Maureen asks, if you use single twig nest tubes, where's the best place to put them?
Put them close to flowers. If you've got flowers, it doesn't have to be right close to them. Don't put them in a wet, dark part of your yard, or all you'll get is earwigs. But they also don't want to be overheated and hot like during the whole day. So and these again are recommendations that come from what has worked for different people who have done this kind of stuff. It hasn't been sort of rigorously studied, but generally a place that would get like a morning sun and then maybe be shaded during the hotter parts of the day seems to work well.
I think that would work well. Let's see, from Camille. This is a follow-up to Ellen's question about overwintering egg versus adult. What keeps the larvae from freezing with so little insulation?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. That's a physiology question. There's got to be something, because they do it all the time. Do you guys know?
Well, at the risk of being wrong, I will say that they use either salts or glycogens in their cells so that the cells kind of freeze but don't get damaged. That's just my guess.
Don't get the ice crystals in there. Yeah.
Yeah, from Christina Williams, ethylene glycol replaces a lot of the water, she says.
Oh, good.
And Lori Weidenhammer also notes that she has seen a leafcutter nesting in a hole in the side of a green foxglove stem.
Okay. There's is it Montavaga that's been seen in live stems? Michael Orr has a paper on that.
Mm-hmm.
This is foxglove. Cool.
All right, let's see. Last question. The obligate climate change question. This is from Bill. Has climate change affected when bees come out of their nests?
I have some suspicions, but I don't have data on that. We do, when we were looking at our new records for Minnesota and their old ranges, we looked at what the frost-free days in Minnesota, and they have been fewer and fewer cold days in Minnesota and a longer growing season. So I guess that that yes, we're getting a little bit longer growing season in Minnesota. And that
Great.
might be allowing new species to come in or to come out earlier. So, but I don't know, I can't say it's climate change for sure.
It's really hard to study those phenomena.
Yeah.
You need a lot of data, and it's just
There's
not
a lot
easy.
of links, and yeah, in that.
It's not easy. Thank you so much, Colleen. That's been absolutely fantastic. And before everyone runs off and gets their rest of their evening going, just bear with me for another 2 minutes. Now, if you're interested in learning more about native bees, consider joining the Master Melitologist program. The Master Melitologist program is a master gardener type program where you'll learn how to contribute to the Oregon Bee Atlas. The program provides extensive learning opportunities about native bees. You'll have the opportunity to go on bee research adventures, frolic in a conservation-minded manner in wildflower meadows, contribute towards native bee conservation, and make amazing discoveries with the Oregon Bee Atlas. So after much deliberation, we've decided that we're going to open up some places in the Master Melitologist program for people that are out of state in California, Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia. So as you can see on this slide, you can mosey over to the Master Melitologist part of our website, and you can sign up to be on the waiting list. Unfortunately, we do have a waiting list, but that we will trial offering the program to people out of state: California, Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia. We would love to have you and help us improve our programming. Now, projects like the Atlas are supported by grants and especially by donations. Please consider giving a gift to the Oregon Bee Atlas at any level. Give us your toonies, and you can visit our website to find where to donate, as you can see on this page, or you can contact us directly to discuss endowments. When you leave, you'll be prompted to take a short survey asking you about topics you'd like to hear about in the future. Please just take the 30 seconds it takes to let us know what you want to hear about with respect to native bees. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in January. Good night, everyone.